from the Apostrophe Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Surviving Life podcast. I'm Les Stroud. The goal here is to motivate you, inspire you, maybe even light a fire under you as a direct result of listening to people who are inspiring, in that they have lived their lives with meaning, with goals, with intention. And so can you. And frankly, so can I. Heck, I mostly had these conversations for my own edification. I want to learn about better ways to live. I want to achieve my own goals. I want to constantly strive for excellence, for something more, maybe even something better than where I'm at now. I'm not so much talking about a legacy, more just living effectually. And this desire will never ebb for me. My agenda, and I hope perhaps yours too, is to remain productive and vital until the day I die. And I intend that to be a long time from now. So let's survive life together. Hello, everybody. You're surviving life with Les Stroud.
I'm working on jealousy. I'm not into hate. I'm working on anger, 'cause I'm not into rage.
Bruce Cockburn is a Canadian legend and a world-class talent. He created a musical interpretation of life uniquely his own. No one has been able to replicate the sound of Bruce Cockburn. His craft on the guitar is an odd blend of Mississippi John Hurt, jazz, and classical techniques. So the legend goes. When Eddie Van Halen was asked what it felt like to be the best guitar player in the world, he replied, "I don't know. Why don't you go ask Bruce Cockburn?" The cadence and syncopation of Bruce's singing and spoken word are inspiringly unlike anyone else you will ever listen to. The smooth, calming tone of his voice often hides the dark and deep meaning of his lyrics. The evocative imagery of his words, whether beautiful or dark, are so insightful they immediately transport you into the world he creates with his inner vision. Often his art is much like a Trojan horse, so you better be ready when Bruce Cockburn sings. Bruce scored the music to my film Laloche about a school shooting in an Indigenous community in northern Canada, but I've been listening to him since I was 14 years old. I got in a high school fight once because somebody had misinterpreted his lyrics. That's something I discovered about Bruce. He likes fighters, yet despises violence. To set the scene for you, we sat in my music room at my house with the doors open, so you may hear the sound of the loons calling in the background. These are the words of Bruce Cockburn.
The first people to die are the peacemakers. That's a tragedy. It shouldn't be that way, but that's what happens. The peacemakers stand up and go, look, we can work this out, and somebody shoots them. I feel like it comes from God, but it comes through me.
At the feast of fools, humor can sometimes be cruel, but under certain conditions, you have to forget the rules.
Time. I'm not dead yet. I think that's really what it's about.
Sunset is an angel weeping, holding out a bloody sword. No matter how I squint, I cannot make out what it's pointing toward. Sometimes you feel like you've lived too long. Days drip slowly on the page. You catch yourself pacing the cage.
Something that I've always found that I really admire in an artist are large bodies of work. So I'll hear stories about somebody like Frank Zappa, 54 albums. Even in my own work, say as a filmmaker, I came to a point where I realized I'd produced over 100 documentary films, and I thought, wow, that's a good number. I hit over 100. I think you're on your 34th or 35th album?
The new album is the 34th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it that makes you be that kind of artist, the prolific artist?
Time. I'm not dead yet. I think that's really what it's about. Zappa died younger than me, but and made 54 albums or whatever he did. And so, I'm not working at that pace. And the whole experiences that accumulate to produce song lyrics, let's say, take time for me. I don't have like millions of ideas that just have to be got out onto the paper, except sometimes. And then whatever I've been living through for a year or less than a year or maybe 2 years will suddenly kind of want to be talked about or want to be expressed in some way, and then out it comes.
And you don't think that encapsulating it, like who I'm thinking of particularly right now is I heard Billy Joel say he did 10 albums and he's done. He said, no, that's a good, nice round number. That's good enough. It sounds like you don't fall in line with that philosophy.
No, I mean, I don't make any rules about it at all. If I don't think of any more songs, then I won't make any more albums. But if I keep thinking of songs, then I'll try to keep recording. I mean, the whole process has slowed down over time. I mean, we put out an album a year in the 70s. The touring load and the rest of life was accommodating of that kind of pace because, I was only touring in Canada until the very end of the 70s, and a Canadian tour for me, if I put all the gigs together, I could do it all in a month. And then you have the rest of the year to hang out and think of things or experience things and digest them and feed that creative fuel stash. As things got busier and, I started touring further afield and all that sort of thing, that even right into the 80s or kind of right away at the beginning of the 80s, it changed after Wondering Where the Lions Are. So, suddenly I'm touring in the States and you could spend a month just doing shows within driving distance of New York City. So there's that much more work to be done. And then you add in Europe and other places and, it's kind of nonstop if you want it to be.
That speaks to sort of the mechanics of managing the time, being an artist, performing the material. But what is it that feeds you in that spiritual, emotional, artistic sense that would prompt continually writing, like writing when you do, I should say? It's kind of like asking, where's the inspiration come from? And
I suspect it's a kind of narcissism. I think it's like, oh yeah, this is happening to me, and I'm very moved by this, and it means a whole lot, and it's got to be the same for you. So here it is. I mean, underneath all the art and whatever else, there's something like that. I think we all want everybody to love us. You want to put out things that make people feel. I mean, it's not as simple as having everybody want to hug me, but intellectually it sort of is. The intellectual equivalent of that. You want people to respond, just kind of be there in the world in some measurable way. I think a lot of us feel like that, and if you're an artist, you actually have a chance to put that into kind of a physical manifestation. But I don't know, you can second guess all this stuff. Really what it comes down to is the writing, what it feels like is it's a kind of a biological urge, like the pressure builds up and the pressure builds up and you don't notice it for a long time. And then I'll find myself, I'll be walking down the street one day and I'll think, geez, I really feel like I should be writing a song. I want to write a song now, and I don't have any ideas or anything. But, within a few weeks of starting to feel that feeling, stuff comes out. And it might be a year between having that feeling, the occasions of having that feeling. But when it's in there and the pressure builds up, then it wants to come out. It's kind of like a bowel movement.
and oftentimes that's what it sounds like too. Well, maybe not in your case, but with some artists.
I hope not to have it sound like that. But the risk is always there, of course.
There's an interesting distinction there between the art, the piece, what I call it is I call it like it's like a ball of energy that can have its own life. But there's two places where it can emanate from. One, you're speaking to it emanating from within. Do you agree with, let's say, sort of the Tom Waits perspective that it's almost also like it's a ball of energy that already exists, is kind of floating around looking for the right vessel, looking for the right outlet to land, whether that's a Bruce Cockburn as he's walking along, or is it coming from inside you, or a bit of both?
It's an interesting notion that it's not something I'd thought about. For me, it comes, I feel like it comes from God, but it comes through me. I mean, when I'm aware of it, it's coming up from inside. The writing is affected so much by circumstance, and the circumstance is, I feel like we're kind of put where we're put, and we're exposed to the things we're exposed to for some reason. Others don't feel that way, but I do. And, I'm always looking around going, well, okay, what am I doing here? Why am I in this place now, confronted by this thing, whatever it might be, positive or negative? If a song comes, it's going to reflect some aspect of that kind of way of being in the world, right? So,
Do you believe in fate?
Not exactly. I believe in a big finger stirring the pot, and
The Monty Python big finger of God?
yeah, in effect, yeah. But every now and then I find myself very aware of that big finger stirring things, and you kind of feel like there's stuff going on. And it's like, well, what the hell? What's this all about? And you think, okay, well, if you choose to have a relationship with the divine, then you're going to be aware of this kind of thing, right? Or you're going to be, have a relationship that isn't much of a relationship, that's based on whatever's in whatever book you hold sacred, and you're not going to be paying attention to those little intuitive things or to the promptings that you get. For me, part of the job of being here on the planet is to cultivate and nurture that relationship, and to be responsive and receptive to those promptings.
It would seem to me that you employ nuances when you do what you're speaking about, which is as opposed to pablum, and for the masses sort of thing. There's nuances in your work. Even in the filmmaking I've done, I felt I employed as an artist nuances that I hoped that the intelligent viewer, listener would pick up on. And many didn't, but though when someone did, I went, there it is. And your music is full of nuances.
I appreciate subtlety, and I think that it has a lot to do with the writers I admired when I first discovered poetry. First time I remember really getting a poem was in grade 6. We had to pick a poem to memorize out of the textbook that we had, and there was a whole bunch of poems. Most of them were not interesting to me, or were too long and difficult to want to take on memorizing them. There was a poem in there by Archibald MacLeish called Ars Poetica, and a poem about what he thought of as the proper way to approach writing poetry. It was pretty short, and it was just full of this imagery that just jumped off the page at me. A poem should be palpable and mute as a globed fruit. A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs. I mean, just these things. I got shivers reading it. And I'd previously, we've studied rhyming poetry. The highwayman came riding, that kind of stuff, right? And some of that was okay and interesting, but it didn't ever hit me until that moment. And then I jumped from that to T.S. Eliot and Dylan Thomas and the other poets of the 20th century that we studied in school. That became my model for using language. I've always been, I still am a fan of poetry. So,
Are you a poet?
I stopped short of calling myself that because I'm afraid to call myself that, because it invites comparison with T.S. Eliot and Dylan Thomas and others. But I certainly use language in a poetic way in my songs. I try to. Somebody described the difference between poetry and, prose as telling you something, and poetry is basically painting you a picture of something. It's an oversimplification, but it's one way to get at the angle of approach that goes into my songwriting. Let's say I'm not telling stories so much as I'm showing scenes. It's a bit more like being a filmmaker, actually, the way I write. As a lot of my songs, it varies from song to song, but a lot of the songs take the shape of scenes with a kind of chorus that unites them or connects them in some way. And how vivid can you make that scene, and how much kind of emotional oomph can you get in there?
cooling wind. Mind swept clean, like Arctic sand. White Stone Lake, crystal clear. I walk on the voices of nightingale. Pine framed space, tiger leaps, emerald tea, reflects the Lord.
Here's a quick story for you. I got a phone call once from Discovery Channel and they asked, "Do you dive?" And I said, "Of course I dive." And they said, "Great." And I knew what they were going to ask. They wanted to know if I would host Shark Week. I was stoked. So I hung up the phone, called a friend and said, "Quick, how do I get certified for diving?" True story. And then when I first dove with Aggressor Adventures, I was hooked on liveaboards for life. A week of 3 or 4 dives a day aboard a beautiful yacht, looked after by engaging and wonderful guides and hosts, and then ending the days with 5-star meals prepped by an incredible chef. Yeah, what's not to be thrilled about that? There's also their safaris in places like Sri Lanka, which I've done, and it was mind-blowing. Or sailing down the Nile River. That one's on my bucket list. If you have not been on an Aggressor Adventure trip yet, go to their website or call them and find your adventure of a lifetime. You're Surviving Life with Les Stroud. I'm sorry, but I'm thinking of so many of your lyrics. You do seem to really take the time to paint that. I mean, one could argue you're telling a story by painting a picture or telling a story using prose poetically, but that always was a reality for me of saying, okay, I mean, look at If a Tree Falls, rainforest, mist and mystery, teeming green, that's very evocative of the rainforest, but then you bring it home with the last line almost like a message. It's our green brain and it's facing
facing lobotomy.
lobotomy.
Yeah.
So you've got poetry, painting, and then kaboom, line of interest of the message.
Yeah, what kind of currency grows in these new deserts? Like that's or new floodplains. I mean,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is there a battle in your mind when you write something like that between how poetic you are versus how not didactic or how straight you are?
No, the struggle is just to think of the next thing.
Yeah,
whatever it is. I mean, I'll know it when I get it. Sometimes I settle for less than what I want because I can't think of anything better. And then sometimes if a song sits there for a couple of weeks, I will think of something better.
Do you scratch much out on your pages?
Yeah, quite a bit often. Or there's big spaces. I mean, I'll write 4 lines one day, and then 3 or 4 days later, I may think of the next 4 lines. Sometimes the song comes out in an hour. It really varies a lot. The spoken word things tend to take longer. Like If a Tree Falls, I mean, those things take longer to write usually because the field is so wide open. Mm-hmm. And you're not necessarily dealing with rhyme, and you're not necessarily dealing with even a verbal rhythm. It's just what works. But with a song that has a rhyme scheme and a rhythmic pattern to the lyrics, then those limitations make it either easier or impossible, depending on what you're doing. And things tend to go faster.
I want to carve it back to what we were talking about earlier. I could say it this way. What's your point? I almost want to do it that way. What's your point, Bruce? What's the point of the writing that you do? What is the mission or the point behind Bruce Cockburn when I am speaking predominantly lyrically at this.
I think of my songs as lyrics. I hardly ever think about the music when I'm asked about songs. Okay, the issue of lyrics starts with, if you're going to have lyrics, they might as well say something. They should be good. Otherwise, what's the point? Just play the music, And there's lots of wonderful instrumental music out there that's perfectly legitimate, and in some ways, it affects you differently and sometimes more deeply than things that are pinned down with words. But if you're going to use words, then you got to work on them. You got to have them say something, and you got to reach out to a listener, the hypothetical listener, with those words. I do it in a pretty haphazard way. I don't have a method. I guess if an outsider looked on, they could say, well, the method is you just wait and sit there, and your notebook stays blank for a long time, and then you write something.
That's
in it.
Your method. Was there ever an agenda in your mission as an artist?
Not much. I mean, in the beginning, I had about a year. The year in 1970, I guess. I thought, well, writers write, like real writers write every day, so I tried writing every day. And by the end of the year, I had about exactly the same amount of usable material as I would have if I just waited for the good ideas. So I scrapped that notion, and I've spent the rest of my life waiting for the good idea. There have been times when I've come back from somewhere, from Mozambique or from Afghanistan, or from Iraq rather, where I really wanted to write something enough to force it. I don't usually do that. I mean, when somebody asked me, we worked on your film, those weren't songs, but that music was, in a sense, forced because I had taken on the job of writing music for your film. And so, okay, I have to do this now, whether I feel it or not. And it doesn't take very long to get into the feeling once that's there. With songs, it's a little more complicated for me, but I really wanted to write something about Iraq. I came up with This Is Baghdad. And I think the recording of it came out pretty well, but I don't think it's my best song. And it was frustrating. It took a long time to get what I got, just to try to organize the experience and the thoughts and the imagery into some communicable form was hard work. The Mines of Mozambique wasn't so hard, Well, because I was in Mozambique longer, I suppose partly too. I had a better sense of the place. Most songs don't require that much forcing. It's just because I've waited and,
And if you are forcing it, do you find yourself telling yourself, oh, I should take a break, I'm forcing this?
No, not because the only time I force it is when I really want to get the thing, and then so it's like, okay, well, I really want a song that talks about Baghdad, about what it felt like to be there.
Which informs which, or what informs what when you come back from a place like Mozambique? Is it a slew of words and you're just going to noodle until you find what fits with those words? Or is there an aggression in your playing that informs the lyric after? Which comes first?
The lyrics come first, then the feeling of wanting to share with people what I experienced or thought. I usually write with a sense of a rhythm in my head. It may not end up being the rhythm that the song finally has in it, but I'll always have some kind of musical element in my head, not a melody, but some kind of riff, or that gives me something to hang the lyrics on. The process of adding music to it is actually all of my songwriting is kind of like scoring a film. I've got images, I've got a story if there is one, and characters or whatever that need to be supported by the music, but not inundated by it. So, some people, I think of beautiful melodies and then they find words to go with them, and that works great. There's a lot of wonderful songs that were written that way. Most songs, I think, probably are written that way. For me, I'm not very good at sitting around either thinking up a melody or thinking of lyrics when I have a melody. It's too hard. I'd rather work from the words. It's easier to manipulate the music.
What was the first protest song you remember hearing?
Probably Where Have All the Flowers Gone? I think, and it was probably the Peter, Paul, and Mary version of that I heard, although I might have heard Pete Seeger's own version of it earlier. I don't remember now, but I was in, I guess, somewhere in high school when those songs kind of came around.
What defines a protest song for you, do you think?
I'm not sure I like the term all that much. I don't use it myself about my own things at all. Obviously other people do and fine, but if I can answer that in personal terms, when I write a song about something, quote unquote, about something, I'm writing about that thing. It's how I feel about it is going to show up in the song. So if I happen to be writing about landmines, and that's what I want to write about, there's feelings associated with that. There's what does the presence of landmines in a landscape mean? So it's going to sound like a protest song because it's got feeling, and it's talking about a concrete thing like that. If I write about there's an old song or an 80s song called "Gospel of Bondage" because I was really offended and continue to be by certain strains of Christianity where people celebrate their self-defined superiority over everybody else and who think that they have the right to tell everybody else how to be. That strain of Christianity tends to be associated with right-wing politics and all kinds of abuses of all sort. So I wrote a song about that because it was it touched me personally. I consider myself a Christian. I'm not affiliated with that kind of Christianity, but I don't completely write off people who are, because everybody's got their life and their story, and that put them where they are. But I don't like it, and so I wrote a song about that. And it's quite critical. And so that, would sound to some people like a protest song, but it's just me basically bitching about what I don't like.
Yeah. Right? Would you say that it's more of a protest song if it's pointed, certainly directed at a specific issue or person or problem or regime, rather than, for example, when I was listening to this one sort of talk about it, they were saying like Sunday Bloody Sunday is not really a protest song. It's just sort of a lament, as opposed to something that Woody Guthrie might have done, where you're really focusing the lyrics on somebody.
If I think of the '60s, where I became aware of that term, or most of us, I guess, became aware of the term protest song, it was a category. It was a way for the music business to categorize something, or for journalists perhaps to categorize something that just as a short form, really, because you don't want to have to sit there and explain why Bob Dylan wrote Masters of War, for instance, right? That's a gorgeous song, a fantastic song, and a powerful one. And that's the good end of what people called protest songs. In my mind, it's not the only thing, but it's one of the good things. At the other end of the spectrum is something like Eve of Destruction, which just sounds like it was written for profit. You know, okay, protest songs are in this year. We're going to write this song and we're going to complain about everything in sight and not offer any depth or anything. I mean, you can hear a song called I'm an American Soldier. I don't know the difference between Iraq and Iran. Those are kind of protest songs, these country songs. And yet they're protesting from a position of self-professed ignorance. Right. I don't know what I'm talking about, but I got feelings about it. Well, okay, that's a legitimate position to express. And the complaint there is, the implication is people who don't support our troops are somehow the enemy, even if they're the person next door, you know. And what does support our troops mean? Well, then you have to have a discussion of what that actually means. You can pray for your troops, and that's a kind of support, or you can send money to USO and they will send toothbrushes and phone cards to the troops and stuff like that. Or you can go join the army, or you bring up your kids to want to fight people. There's all these different things, but and you can vote for politicians that want war. So that's why it's in that context that, to me, those songs, those country songs that talk like that, are perhaps not protesting. They're more, what would the word be? Sort of encouraging,
firing people up, like a rally cry.
Yeah, in a way, and it appeals to the sentiment in us. And I don't want to slag those artists or those songs really, because they're expressing something that I imagine feels true to them, and that's what they should be doing. But there's a discussion to be had around all that. That's all.
I think there's this danger, and you were touching on this. When you said Eve of Destruction, for example, and for you, it felt like that seems pretty commercial. And there's a danger there is potentially words might seem like they are meant to be a bit of a rallying cry, a strong opinion about a political state or something like that, but it's served up on a bed of pop, let's say, pop rock sort of thing. And so the question then is the message lost when it's painted with too many colors, too pretty, and
I think you can make anything work. It's just it depends on how well you do it. And after that, it depends. I mean, it was something that gets a massive amount of media exposure, eventually loses its power because you just heard it too many times. And then you hear something else that might come along that might be a great song that talks about the same issue, and you're tired of that before you even hear it because you've heard this other one so much. So that kind of can happen. That's a danger. The big issue for an artist is just to do it right. There's no reason why Katy Perry should be written off just because her music is pop music. I mean, some of her songs are saying important things. There's a range. All these things. You can have a pop song that talks about something meaningful, or you can have a pop song that just uses cheap rhymes and says basically nothing, or basically I'd like to sleep with you or whatever, and all kinds of complicated ways of, or less complicated repetitions of how to say that, that goes with music. That's the gist of most pop songs. Either I want to sleep with you or I wish I hadn't.
Yeah. Do you feel or do you yourself use irony at all? And if so, does the irony end up getting lost? And I'm thinking, here's a great example of what I'm talking about. The Randy Newman song, Rednecks. I don't know if you're familiar with that
yes,
song.
Yes, I am. Yeah.
So it turns out that Randy now, he actually he stopped playing it in concert. And he stopped playing it in concert because the Rednecks at his concerts used it as their rallying cry, even though the irony is that he was completely denigrating them in what he was saying. But
it's like politicians keeping on trying to use Born in the USA, thinking it's a patriotic song.
And it's absolutely not.
No, it's very critical. It's I mean, that's a good song too.
So what happens when the irony is actually lost?
Well, that's a risk you just have to take. I don't think you can, if you try to head that off, then you're going to be involved in self-censorship, and that's the killer. So you can't really...
You're going to be too obvious.
You can, yeah. I think, well, you just don't say what needs to be said, maybe, because, or the best way you could say it, because you're worried about external things that don't really have anything to do with the process. I don't think you can worry too much about that. After the fact, yes, and then you pay attention to those things and how are people taking it. I mean, if I had a rocket launcher, it was a hit because it was angry sounding, not because people sympathized with the situation in Guatemala. But a lot of people heard about the situation in Guatemala because they responded to the song. So, they were drawn in. When I wrote it, I wasn't thinking of of propagandizing. I was crying when I wrote that song. I was so moved and so outraged by what I'd encountered in those refugee camps in Chiapas.
Here comes the helicopter, second time today. Everybody scatters and hopes it goes away. How many kids they've murdered, only God can say. I don't believe in guarded borders, and I don't believe in hate. I don't believe in generals or their stinking torture states. And when I talk with the survivors of things too sickening to relate, on the real lock and tune, 100,000 wait to fall down from starvation or some less humane fate. Crying for Guatemala with a corpse in every gate. If I had a
When you think adventure of a lifetime, well, what comes to mind? Scuba diving with a school of hammerhead sharks? Yeah. A Sri Lankan safari with wild leopards and elephants? I did that. Or sailing down the Nile River to experience all that ancient Egypt has to offer? Haven't done that yet. Aggressor Adventures does all of that and more. Since 1984, Aggressor Adventures has been the world leader in 5-star journeys. They'll take you to some of the most remote locations around the world, and you will indulge in the culture and the experiences that feed your adventurous soul. I'm all about adventure. Their customer service is second to none, and those are my words, not advertising copy. If you have not been on an Aggressor Adventure trip yet, go to their website or call them and find your adventure of a lifetime. You're surviving life with Les Stroud.
I was really outraged by the stuff that I'd seen in these refugee camps in Chiapas that I'd visited. And I wanted to communicate that sense of outrage. I wasn't sure about putting it out there at all because of what it says. I didn't want it to be interpreted as an exhortation to go out and kill Guatemalan soldiers, even though that's kind of what it says. What I wanted to show with that aspect of the song was how easy it is to get into that mindset when you're in a situation like that. And therefore, my peace-loving peers shouldn't be critical of people who take up arms in a context like the military dictatorship of Guatemala because they have no choice. They're pushed to that point. The choice is to sit back and watch their children die for lack of medicine, or watch the guy with glasses be tortured to death because he's wearing glasses, and that means he might be able to read, and therefore he's a threat to the dictatorship. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that was going on routinely. So eventually people get pushed to the point where they're going to fight about it. We can't tolerate this any longer. Or they're under attack and they have to respond somehow. You know, the alternative is death. And when you look at those situations, and like the situations with civil wars all over the world, the first people to die are the peacemakers. That's a tragedy. It shouldn't be that way, but that's what happens. The peacemakers stand up and go, look, we can work this out, and somebody shoots them. So then you're left with the people who can look at that and go, well, that happened to him, and he was the guy with the brains and the will to actually, and the courage to stand up. And so, you know, I'm either out of here as a refugee, or I'm going to be fighting back. My hope with Rocket Launcher was that people would understand that that's where it was coming from. And some people did, luckily. You know, a lot of people did get that. I mean, other people said, would just say, oh yeah, I love that song, you know. And you get people, when the last line comes, some son of a bitch would die, audiences cheer, which always gives me the creeps. And I sang that song in a big circus tent at an English festival one time. It was 2,000 people in a circus tent, and they all sang along with it. 2,000 English people saying some son of a bitch would die is awe-inspiring and terrifying. It's people responding to the feeling. And in that context, I wasn't worried about a misinterpretation so much, but
it can be taken, like the Randy Newman example, it can get taken out of context.
Okay, I'm in Kandahar, and we're out on a forward operating base, and we did a little impromptu concert at lunchtime for the troops. And these guys, they're men and women, mostly men, that were kind of haggard and, you know, living right on the edge. He said, well, just on the other side of that hill, it's the Wild West. You know, and there's a big lineup of Leopard tanks waiting to get ready to go and all this stuff. I sang a couple of songs, and I sang If I Had a Rocket Launcher because it seemed like the one that...
It seemed appropriate.
Well, not for the reason that I wrote it,
right,
but it seemed to fit. And that's the one they really liked. I mean, most of them were Francophone, so they didn't get it right away, but you could see the muttering, the whispering, did you hear what you just said? And then, then they're sort of cheering. You know, and you have to give them that the license to interpret it how they want in a situation like that, because these people are really up against it.
That's an interesting thing you touch on there. When you give your listener the license to interpret something in any which way they want. I remember Seal saying, "I don't mind mumbling my words because they'll put in their own words and meaning." And I always thought, I like Bob Dylan's words. I like knowing what the words are saying.
Yeah.
I like knowing what the artist meant to say I can still extrapolate.
And sometimes if we misunderstand, I mean, sometimes I remember thinking, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And I'm thinking, why would I not want my shepherd? Like, what does that mean? What does that mean? And no one ever explained it to me. You know, people do that with songs, right? You hear it a certain way and it stays that way for you.
And often you don't find out till years later what the writer actually meant.
Somebody I know heard Last Night of the World, where I'm sipping Flor de Cana, it's 3 a.m. And one person I know said, oh, gee, Flor de Cana, what's that? I thought it said Florida Canyons. I'm going, well, there aren't any canyons in Florida. Oh, I know, but I thought that was poetry.
Poetic license.
So there you go. You know, I mean, we can make all the pronouncements we want about the value of poetry and everything, but you have no control over, once it's out there, over what people are going to make it into. Or, you know, as example, Born in the USA, or as, any number of other songs that have a catchy chorus and people don't listen to the verses.
Well, I've often I've had arguments with fellow musicians, friends of mine, where they said, no, the lyrics don't matter. It's the whole package, this and that. And I remember one time when it was a drummer and he was saying, no, he goes, like take Yesterday, for example. You know, Paul McCartney sat on that song for a year and he had scrambled eggs in the place of Yesterday for the longest time until, you know, so it shows you, words don't matter. I'm like, no, you actually just made my point.
Yeah.
The song isn't called Scrambled Eggs. It's called Yesterday. Scrambled Eggs Yesterday. For a reason. The words really do matter. Even blues. I'm a passionate lover of blues, as I think I know as you are. The best blues, if you really listen, you know, when Sunhouse says, you know, woke up last night between midnight and day, hugging my pillow where my baby used to lay. That sounds simple, but it's powerful.
Yeah, of course. It's a visceral human experience expressed in a clear and passionate way. And lyrics don't have to be complicated to be good. There's a whole, you know, another angle from the one I take. I mean, it's not how I operate, but I've been asked sometimes, you know, well, how do you write songs? How do I start writing lyrics or something? Well, if you want to get into using language, read a lot of poetry. Understand it, read it, know what poets do. But then somebody standing beside me goes, or just know what you want to say and say it. You know, and both are true. But I just tend to complicate things for myself as much as possible in life generally. So, you know, including in the writing. But somebody else can take a head-on approach like that and go, yeah, well, I want to say this. And then you just try to find a nice way to say it.
A poem should be palpable and mute as a globed fruit, dumb as old medallions to the thumb, silent as the sleeve-worn stone of casement ledges where the moss has grown. A poem should be wordless as the flight of birds. A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs, leaving as the moon releases, twig by twig, the night-entangled trees. Leaving as the moon behind the winter leaves, memory by memory, the mind. A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs. A poem should be equal to, not true, for all the history of grief, an empty doorway and a maple leaf, for love, the leaning grasses and two lights above the sea. A poem should not mean, but be. I was fired from a job because of Bruce Cockburn. I was a relief disc jockey at the local radio station CJTT in New Liskeard, Ontario. They had a sign on the desk that read, "Banned songs do not play!" There was only one song on the list, Rocket Launcher. I thought, how dare you? So I played it. That was a Saturday. I was fired on the Monday, but I managed to slip in the Trojan horse for a moment. Make sure you listen to part 2 of my interview with Bruce Cockburn. Thanks for surviving life with Les Stroud. We've been engineered by Keith Oman, and we are part of the Apostrophe Podcast Network. All the rest was done by me. I carry the Pelican cases, set up the microphones, and press record. Keep listening, everyone. We'll figure this out. Oh, hey, wait a second. Sorry, one more thing. Totally forgot. This is my moment of shameless self-promotion. But If you are not yet watching my brand new series, Les Stroud's Wild Harvest, well, you need to. It's all about local foraging, and then I'll go out and I'll show you a number of plants, and I'll bring them back into a kitchen or a cookery outdoors or somewhere where Chef Paul Rogalski will turn them into an incredible meal. You got to see this show, Les Stroud's Wild Harvest. It's airing now on a public television station near you. And if the public television station near you is not airing it, then email them, phone them, show up on their doors, blackmail them, do whatever you have to do to get Les Stroud's Wild Harvest on their station so that you can watch it. The second part of the self-promotion is for this channel, if you're watching this, and if you're not, this channel is the YouTube channel, Survivorman-Les Stroud. I have a ton of stuff on there. I really got on the game for YouTube about 6 or 8 months ago, and I have been populating it with all kinds of material. New stuff, archive stuff, all kinds of information from how-tos to Survivorman episodes to Survivorman Bigfoot to director's commentaries. So check out my YouTube channel, Survivorman-Les Stroud, because I am keeping it really, really active. So brand new series, Les Stroud's Wild Harvest. Don't forget my YouTube channel. And lastly, we are going back into the printers, and by popular request, releasing again my 20th anniversary film collection. 76 films, every film I have made over the past 25 years, to be honest with you, but 20 years. And it's available through the website, lesstroud.ca. All right. Okay. I guess that's it. Thanks a lot for listening. And I don't know, go pour yourself a coffee and go listen to some more of my podcasts, if you so choose. Thanks, guys.